Welcome everyone. Today we are joined by Nick Flum. Nick is in charge of the Northern Plain UAS test site. Sorry, I was trying to find my notes here. And Nick is the executive director there. And we've talked about this test site in the past in our news update with our students. And Nick, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited that we can talk about beyond visual line of sight today. BVLOS is kind of a big term these days with a remote ID right around the corner and the UTM concept and all of this. So Nick is going to talk to us about what they're trying to accomplish or what they're actually accomplishing in North Dakota, which to me is amazing. I think this is something that we will see in the future in probably the rest of the country, and we're going to talk about this today. But Nick, welcome. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. Tell us about your aviation story.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Gary, for having me. Yeah, glad to be able to share, what we're doing up here and, a little bit on like how we got to this point. Yeah, like you mentioned, I'm executive director of the Northern Plains UAS test site. From a background standpoint, manned aviation, I'm a 4,000 hour ATP. If I roll the clock back a little bit to about 10, 15 years ago, the skies were not going to be blackened by drones. They were going to be blackened by very light jets flying around, in an air taxi type of environment. And that's kind of where I got some start on did some 135 flying, and kind of on the hopes that was going to turn into something, and it didn't quite. So I got involved with some friends who had a software company, started doing some work supporting the Air Force on some computer-based training for the Predator aircraft for the Air Force. And then eventually the test site program came along, and North Dakota was selected as one of the 6 UAS test sites by the FAA. And actually we're coming up on year 7 at the end of this month. We were selected as one of them December 30th of 2013. So you roll back on what's happened in UAS and in drones, and quite honestly 7 years ago we hated the word drones, tried to avoid that at all costs possible, and now we embrace it, and it's kind of part of the nomenclature now. So yeah, it's pretty cool on where we've come in the last 7 years, and man, I can't even imagine what the next 7 is going to bring us.
That I just had that discussion recently with somebody else. I said we're about a week into the aviation timeline. If you think about when the Wright brothers first flew, we're pretty much at the end of week 1 right now for drones. Right. It's there's so much to come, and that's exciting. So you mentioned the program with the FAA. That's the IPP, the Integration Pilot Program. Tell us a little bit more about what that is. And I know you were selected also for the successor, which is the new version, which is called Beyond. Tell us more about what that program actually looks like, what it entails, and tell us more.
Yeah, so perfect. So if I'm going to tie a little bit in. So the test site program, I think at its core it was to help with the integration of UAS into the airspace, and it really has a pretty strong research component that's tied into it. Testing of vehicles, testing of sensors, testing of applications. Things weren't moving quite fast enough. So there was another program that was put out about 3 years ago, got the announcement for the UAS Integration Pilot Program. And really what the point of that was to, help expedite, the commercialization for some of these more advanced types of operations, your night operations, your operations over people, and then, the holy grail of it all, the beyond visual line of sight. That was a 3-year program. It actually just sunset a little over a month ago in October. But from the FAA standpoint, they said the work isn't done. There's more that can be accomplished, and they actually allowed ends up being 8 of the 9 participants in that program into a new one called Beyond. And as the name implies, that's the main focus of this is beyond visual line of sight. How do we make that into something that's scalable, repeatable, and then probably just as important of all those is the economically viable component of it. How do we get this to not become something that's has a huge barrier of entry in order to do some of these advanced operations. So we're going to be working closely, with the FAA and industry partners in order to move that program along.
Yeah, and for listeners, the FAA has put in this concept of operation ConOp for UTM, which is the Unmanned Traffic Management System, and in there they kind of talk about a lot of different types of operation, and then the advanced type of operation that you're mentioning, flying at night, flying over people, flying beyond visual line of sight, those are considered advanced, and I think the FAA, and that's what you guys are doing, are trying to make it not advanced, to make it more routine. And if you guys are interested in reading this document, it's about an 80-page document that the FAA put out. I actually read it cover to cover because I think the concept is just, if you want to understand what remote ID is about, if you want to understand what the future is going to look like in the airspace, the ConOp 2.0 is just a great document. So I would recommend that you guys, well, I'll put a link down here so if you guys want to read it. Now, Nick, paint us a picture of the test site. We'll talk about BVLOS in a second. Paint us a picture of your test site. What does that look like? Are we talking about a football size? I know this is not really what we're talking about here. Thousands of acres? Do you have an airport nearby? Are you in the middle of nowhere? What kind of landscape do you have? Tell us.
Yeah, so great. People are like drastically disappointed when they say, "Hey, I want to come to the test site," and I go, "Perfect, come down and this is what you see. You come to my office." And they're like, "Well, what do you mean?" I'm like, we don't have like I'll call it, like, if I were to differentiate, like a test range, like a physical location. That's probably what you have in your mind. You probably have something with, radars and sensors and antennas and all that. Like, sorry, man, we don't have any of that. And the reason behind it, is, again, I roll back to what was happening when we were initially stood up. One of the great use cases was precision agriculture. How do we use drones for precision ag? And one of the things that we recognized was, what if I have a test range and we have someone who wants to do an application like that, and they come to us, but we don't have the appropriate crop, we don't have the disease, we don't have what they're looking for underneath that application.
Yep.
Well, now I don't meet their needs. So what we did is we actually set ourselves up for, if I really look at like our test site, we have a mobile command center, that's equipped. It's a trailer that, we allow ourselves to go remote. We go where industry needs us to go. And, that's been something that's been, pretty incredible for us as a way to move things forward. It's allowed us to support industry even better. If one of our companies that we've worked with for probably the last 5 years is XL Energy, their transmission electric utility. They have their transmission lines are in like 8-9 states. So if I just try to limit them to one area to enable these advanced operations, we're not doing our job to support industry appropriately. So yes, we got some capabilities, within the state that we can support people, relationships with landowners and some of those different types of components. But that physical test range, it's where do you need to go and we'll come to you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So your approval with the FAA is kind of it's philosophical in a way. It's not this airspace. You're approved to do this kind of test site. Is your organization is allowed to do testing throughout the state?
Yeah, you're spot on. What we actually have is we have a relationship with the FAA, and just as ourselves as a public entity, we're able to get the airspace approvals, directly. So, we don't necessarily. The FAA has given us a nationwide approval for a lot of our testing, and if the test does not meet that nationwide approval, then we can go and request, specific blocks of airspace for a specific ConOp in order to support the customer's needs.
For research, yeah. Well, that's awesome. Yeah. How often do you guys fly? Is the daily, weekly? I'm sure it probably varies depending on the time of year and what you're working on, but how many pilots do you have working in there?
Yeah, so we have a combination. So, number of flight, there's probably somewhere in the country, we probably have a flight going on every day, kind of one way or another. This year I would classify as maybe COVID was not obviously anybody's friend when it came to a lot of things. So we had a couple slowdowns. the number of flight operations will probably still exceed, somewhere around 2,000 flight operations this year. So,
Okay.
you start running some simple math on that. If you're, there's a lot of flights that happen on a daily basis,
Yeah,
type of deal.
Yep.
Some of that is, we're able to support some of those flights internally. That we have, I have a set of, a flight crews. I have a director of operations. He has, pilots that work for him. I've got, about 5 that are dedicated to that. But sometimes our customers are doing their own flying. It actually makes more sense because if they're, an example is a company who's developing their own UAS. It's actually safer for them to be the pilot. They understand the system a little bit better than to try to train us up on something. So we have a little bit of a combination of whether it's us directly supporting those operations or whoever our customer is.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, very specific type of flying. You may not have a pilot that has experience doing that.
Right.
Yeah. So now you guys are working on beyond visual line of sight. So like you said, kind of the holy grail. And for those of you that are listening, beyond visual line of sight, under Part 107, if you want to fly beyond visual line of sight, you need a waiver. You need to have all sorts of approval from the FAA, which takes a long time. And so you guys are trying to make this easier, more routine. And obviously there's a motivation behind this. Tell us a little bit more about the motivation of doing this.
Yeah, so my main motivation on a lot of these things is how do we support industry better? You start to look at different challenges that industry is facing, and one of them on the beyond visual line of sight component, we've watched a couple of the major players who have been able to achieve this. Companies like that we supported, XL Energy, Burlington Northern Santa Fe, from a rail inspection standpoint, they've been a really forward-leaning company, have got these types of approvals. And the interesting part is it's really challenging for them to scale their operations. And part of that is the amount of infrastructure that is required to fly beyond visual line of sight. One of the challenges, what makes it hard is that I've removed the man out of the airplane and I can't, see and avoid anymore. So I need to have another means in order to do that. If that's a radar, so some other type of surveillance sensor, I need to be able to deploy that. If I want to fly long ranges, sometimes what we run into is radio line of sight type of challenges where literally the command and control between my ground control station and my drone, it only goes so far. So can I set up some type of terrestrial ground network? And sometimes how you have to network all these things together and you got to bring them back to the pilot. And you start going, wow, that's a lot for an individual to set up. And Burlington Northern, they probably have, I'm throwing numbers out there, I don't know, anywhere probably 20 to 50,000 miles of transmission or of rail line. XL's probably got similar between transmission and distribution. And those are like 2 companies. There's a whole bunch that are in that industry that would love to do this. Well, how do you scale that? So you think about, well, how did we scale transportation on the ground? We have roads, and those roads are used for everybody. We don't have one person building a road. It's a single infrastructure for multiple users. And in manned aviation, it's the same way. We don't land at, Delta Airlines doesn't have an airport that's just for Delta Airlines, and then next door to it is United Airlines.
Yep.
They fly across the country on the same VORs, they use the same ILSs, and they land at the same airports. Right now, we're not doing that with UAS. We're literally having to build out our own network of VORs just for a single user, and really hard to scale that. And that's also making it a huge barrier of entry. So what we're trying to do, at least in North Dakota, and something we want to have that sets a model that can be scaled, is a single infrastructure for multiple users, that we can put in some of those things that are challenging, the surveillance component, the command and control, and make sure that this is something that can be FAA approvable. like what you mentioned, you go through a waiver process. Waivers are, in some ways, they're a one-off, right? You have to put together the safety case and all that kind of stuff because it's not the way. You're not meeting a requirement. You're trying to prove that I actually can't meet a requirement. I'm going to show you like my equivalent level of safety. It'd be much better if we could actually have something that, hey, this is something that the FAA recognizes, this is something that they accept, and you can now bring your vehicle in to do these more advanced operations. That's kind of the ultimate goal.
So you're building the roads basically and saying, hey, this route has been approved by the FAA, just go ahead and get on the road.
You got it. Yeah. I mean, short answer is yes. To super simplify it all.
I like to keep it simple for everyone. So what does that look like on the ground? If we're talking about a network of things. Do you have antennas? What is the equipment that you need to put in place in order to create this network of BVLOS flights?
Okay, so now the antennas and radars, yes, they become real. As opposed to my test range that doesn't have any of that. Yeah. So this is the way that we're looking at it. So this is a state initiative that we're looking to do. So I'm trying to what do I already have out there for resources, that we can leverage? We need places to install this stuff. So towers are a good place. There's tons of towers out there. The state actually has a state radio network. They have towers. So on these towers, we're going to start installs of different equipment. One of those is radios for the command and control of UAS, and start to establish a terrestrial network, ground-based terrestrial network of radios, so that you can actually go from tower to tower, no different than you do on a cell phone, and be able to do the long-range flight. So you have an install of that. Then you go into the surveillance sensor side of things. If I were to radar, we're going to have radars that's going to be able to detect some of the non-cooperative targets that are out there. That'd be your guy who's flying around without a transponder. Got it. That's what makes aviation great, is that we have, and it also makes aviation great in the United States. It also makes us have the most complex airspace because we allow those types of operations. Fine, we'll find mitigations for determining those primary targets that are out there. And then also, being able to leverage, people who are cooperative, that have ADS-B out, that, we can have an ADS-B surveillance sensor that's out there, that's at lower altitudes, that maybe is a gap filler of where, the ADS-B feeds that the FAA has, they might not be in my same location. So, being able to fill in some of those different types of gaps.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of like the physical install component of it. We're looking at, multiple sites in order to do this, and they all have to come together to be networked. And the state of North Dakota, we have our information technology department has a backhaul network that state agencies use, our schools use within. And we're going to leverage that as a backhaul, and we're going to bring that all into a mission and network operations center. And this is kind of, at the end of the day, this is kind of where the brains and the overall kind of approval portion of it. This is where your health status of the network happens to be located. So if you're out there flying and I have a sensor that goes down, I need to be able to communicate that back to the operator. We're going to have 24 hour health status monitoring of the network, making sure that everything is up and going. If we do have anomalies come in, that's great. And then how do we fix them? How do we bring that stuff online? And then this is also where the mission operations center component also comes in. How are you getting onto the network? How are you establishing this? Your connectivity, and over time, this is gonna, as you mentioned earlier, this UAS traffic management, UTM, the 2.0. We start checking a lot of the boxes of the different types of services that are going to be provided, as part of UTM.
Yep. Yeah, I can hear a lot of what you're saying, and it's starting to connect in my head. You guys are getting to that point where everything kind of connects, and that's kind of the key, I think, is the because you guys are trying to get detection so that you can have the sharing of information between all of the users in the airspace, and then helping with the length of the signal to get that. I'm guessing this is kind of like a repeater where you have your signal is going to be sent to control the drone over a certain distance. You're repeating the signal, and yeah, okay. So that's
yeah. I mean, very very similar. Yep.
yeah, yeah.
Type of concept. Yep.
Yep. So I guess this is where Ventus comes in, right? Ventus is your partner that is creating this network.
Yeah, so essentially, what Vantage is, I kind of classify it as like that's the product, like that is this package. That is what's if I look at overly simplifying it a little bit here, but my remote infrastructure, which is my C2 and my surveillance, and I've got my backhaul network, and I got my mission network operations center, and a UAS that can fly on it. That's the package. That's Vantis. That's the system that enables all this. And when you're going to get the FAA approval, and you got a UAS that maybe has been certified and it's ready to fly, and they're going to go, great. So where are you going to go fly it? Well, it needs somewhere to do this, and having an area that is supported by Vantis is that's the key. Yeah, this is something that's starting in North Dakota, but we're trying to make sure that this is not a one-off, that it's something that's special just for us. This is something that's supposed to be advantageous for the UAS industry, and hopefully will continue to spread beyond our borders.
Yeah, and that's why I was excited to talk to you, because as I read more about everything that you guys are doing, it clicked in my head. This is something you can replicate. I'm not going to say easily, because it's not going to be easy, but it's in concept. It is something that can be done somewhere else. So you guys are funded from the state. Is that what I heard you say earlier?
Yeah, that's correct. So I'm going to say we are in a very fortunate situation on how the state is looking at UAS and this type of advanced technology. A lot of people don't know much about North Dakota. You can imagine if you have an initial view of it, it's probably farm fields and very flat, and you're not wrong about that. 90% of our land has agricultural purposes tied to it. Very commodity based when it comes to revenue for the state. Maybe a fact that you guys don't all know, that North Dakota is the second largest oil producing state in the country. So behind Texas, it's North Dakota when it comes to oil. So oil and gas and agriculture, those are very commodity based industries. So when things are good, hey man, like the state's budget looks incredible. When the commodities are down, it's challenging times. So how do you diversify that? How do you diversify the economy, and how can you bring in something that can be a little bit more even keel? And we look at technology as one of those players. What kind of role in technology can North Dakota play, and UAS being one of those initiatives. And how can we expedite the commercialization of UAS in the state? And if we can do that, how does that help our economy? We think that it can be greatly beneficial. So we do have, we have a governor who's very forward-leaning when it comes to technology. We have state legislators who support that vision and, are willing to fund this. We've got Vantage right now is operating on a $28 million appropriation from the state. And, that is a substantial investment when it comes to this. We're taking advantage of that. There's going to be that doesn't do it all. We know that there's going to be additional investments. We're looking at this as probably something that the state is on the front end, but in government, we love public-private partnerships. We think that you can do a lot with that, and so we've got some way more than just seed money going on, but we've got enough, I think, to really start to help things move forward.
Yeah, you actually answered one of the questions I had on my list, which is I see two states right now that are at the top of the UAS movement, and that's North Dakota and North Carolina. And I think you've answered perfectly for me is, you've got help from the state, you've got somebody who's into technology leading the state, and that's going to give you the leadway to do this. And I wish we'd see more of this, quite frankly, across the country, because I think a lot of people are not realizing what drones. Actually, I have a funny story about this. You're a UND grad, and you graduated right around the same time that I did in college. And I was an FIT grad in Florida. And one of my bosses, you remember going to, that was probably in like 2005 or 2006. And you guys at UND had a huge drone program, a UAS program at the time. And I told my boss, I said, we have to get into UAS because this thing is going to be huge. And unfortunately, he was he was an astronaut actually. He was an astronaut and a former F-16 pilot, I think. And he did not believe in drones. He was a man aircraft guy, and he said, "No, we're not really going to do this. There is no future there." And I kicked myself because this could have been massive. So I'm really glad that you guys kept doing this, and I know UND has a big influence up there, yeah. And that's great. That's really great to see what you guys are doing. So how far into a statewide implementation are you? Percentage?
Yeah,
right? Tell me more.
Yeah, so this is a program that we essentially we got funding for just over a year ago. I'll say there's kind of like the behind the scenes component of it that that we've been working really hard on. One of the things that we're calling it is like our functional architecture. Like, how does all of this like work and connect, and what's the user experience, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We've been trying to put a lot of those pieces out there, which is not necessarily like shovels in the dirt type of work.
Yep.
We've brought on partners to support this. We've got when it comes to aviation, three of the best. We've got Collins Aerospace, L3 Harris Technologies, and Thales USA. I mean, anytime that like essentially you're jumping on an airplane, all three of those companies are probably touching some part of your aviation experience. Yep. And those are our partners that are helping support this. And right now we've got what we're calling a key site. This is kind of our initial rollout area. We're doing it in the western part of the state, which is in the heart of our oil and gas industry. As you can imagine, lots of great use cases that are tied to drones and in the oil and gas industry. So it makes a lot of sense. We wanted to again have single network for multiple users. That was a good place to have the multiple users. And we're in process of right now of we've been out there doing the site survey side of things, making sure that where we're going to be installing, making sure we have all the appropriate approvals, and in the next month or so, I actually start the actual installs of this. And the installs will come with us doing site acceptance testing, flying on the network, making sure that determining the service volumes of how much area can we get, working with the FAA on getting some of these advanced approvals, and really looking at what does spring of 21 of a goal of having this something be operational in the western part of the state. Once we have that up and going, let's continue to go from there. I kind of look at it from a strategy. Yeah, you build, and we've kind of like, I kind of say like we've dubbed it as like a statewide network. I like to use the term like across the state because I look at like a cell phone coverage map. Everyone's kind of seeing like Verizon has everywhere that they have. Their goal wasn't to make the entire country red. It was to make the entire country red where there's users. And that's kind of the same concept that we're looking at is we want to make sure that we roll this out where there's users and where there's use cases. That's more important to us than, every square mile being covered. So
you're building the interstate instead of building every single road in between.
You got it. Yeah. Very, very good analogy.
Yeah. That makes total sense to me. Now, a lot of our viewers and students are individual users that are going to be flying their drone for, I would say, simpler missions. do you foresee this kind of network in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, being available to pretty much anyone who wants to fly their drones beyond visual line of sight? Or is this kind of going to still be reserved in the future to larger drones that have more equipment on board?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a criteria that needs to be met. I kind of look at if you want to use your manned pilot analogy, there's a lot of private pilots out there, but it's different to be an instrument pilot, and there's more training, there's more requirements. And I look at beyond visual line of sight is very similar. Where if I look at a recreational or even a Part 107 guy who's doing operations, great, man, a lot of that stuff kind of looks like a private pilot's license.
Yep.
There's limitations that are in place, but it also gives you an incredible amount of opportunities to do things, but doesn't let you do everything. We look at, as long as you meet those more advanced requirements, it's going to become available for you.
That's awesome. And tell me a little bit more. Maybe you don't have that yet. Maybe it's a concept. The user interface. What does that look like? I'm working for the oil and gas industry, and I want to go and do this BVLOS flight. Do I request like a Lance request type of thing? Tell me more.
Yeah, so this kind of goes back into that functional architecture side of things. How does it look? And I'm going to say that this is going to start to look a little bit more, as UTM, starts to expand. It's, it'll fit in a little bit more, and maybe some of the FAA's concepts that they have not rolled out yet. But yeah, maybe kind of a similar type of interface, where you have a credential, you need to log into the system. You need to verify who you are and that you can be, on the system. And you make a request. This is a very similar type of request that's being made right now. Part of what we're not seeing, yet as a normal UAS operator, but the testing that's being done on the UAS traffic management, on the UTM, the work that NASA's done, now that the FAA is doing, requesting airspace, that's part of it. Really, we've seen the request of through the authorization, with Lance, but we really haven't been reserving airspace. We've just been notifying that we're going to be using it. Where some of the other features of UTM actually get into a little bit more of the reservation component of it, and letting people know I'm going for a certain period in a particular volume of airspace.
So this is something I want to touch on because I see a lot of misunderstanding from a lot of users out there when we start talking about BVLOS, and Amazon is the one that always gets blamed. I don't know why, but Amazon is going to be the one that takes over the airspace and destroy everybody's hobby. And this is not true. You and I know this from reading concepts, but you said the key word there, reserve the airspace. We're talking about a 4D system here. We have the 3D component, and then we have a time component. Explain to people what that reservation of airspace means and why the big guys are not going to take over the airspace and kick everybody else out of the airspace.
So again, I love my manned pilot analogies on some of these things. This is kind of like your difference between, there's 5,000 operations that are happening by commercial airliners right now, but I have no problem. I can still go fly my Cessna and they don't affect me. Those guys are reserving their airspace, and there's a, how do I get, high volume of traffic going into LaGuardia? They're reserving it, and, there's, it's all sequenced, right? But that doesn't mean that I can't land at another airport or, be operating in the same airspace as they are. So when I think about a couple different components, so let's just throw in the visual line of sight component, if a Part 107, their operations, you have requirements. You have see and avoid type of requirements that are already in there. You have responsibility as a remote pilot in command. Those aren't going to go away. We're going to still maintain that, and you know what? You can operate just fine. In that type of environment, no different than a VFR pilot can operate. Commercial pilots or commercial airliners really don't, at the end of the day, affect me as a VFR pilot.
Yep.
I look at this kind of a similar type of fashion that, we're from a reservation. One of the beauties, like you said, the 4D component, when you throw that time element in there, you're reserving it in real time and for a particular period of time. And this is where like, as I try to explain, why do we even need UAS traffic management? What makes this so special? And the way I describe it is, again, I go 5,000 airliners up in the air, maybe right now. It's easy. They can do all that deconfliction through voice communication. Air traffic control tells me, change frequencies, change altitudes, voice comm, no problem. What happens if I take 5,000, I put it over a single community? I can't deconflict with voice anymore. I need technology to come into play.
Yep.
And that technology can actually do a whole bunch of negotiation. And that's where, they actually have, part of the UTM system is where I make a request and you make a request, we make it at the same time. And we can actually have an automated negotiation system come into play.
Yep.
How about you go 1 foot higher and leave 1 second earlier? Cool. We both get to fulfill our mission, but with just a little bit of a tweak here. And that's how we avoid it. There's always gonna be density issues. Got it. But that's the whole point of managing this, is that we have something that not only can be managed, but it can be negotiated as well.
Yeah, deconfliction is going to be important. So I love it. I'm glad you mentioned all of this. When I say it, sometimes it just gets over people's heads. So hopefully it gets the point across. I know, remote ID has been, I'm a proponent of remote ID, but because I understand why it's important for all of this to happen, I'm just kind of critical of the FAA of the way they're trying to implement it, and I wish there was a slightly different way. So we'll see what comes out. You may know more than I do on what's coming out, but I think it's going to be very interesting. So you had to work with the FAA quite a bit in the state legislation. From what you're telling me, it sounds like it's been going well.
Yeah, so let's start with the FAA. Again, interestingly enough, we kind of talked about both of our backgrounds. The way that we got our pilot certificates was through a 141, and what the whole point of that is that you actually have, designated examiners that are not the FAA, and they can do everything in house. So we could literally go through all of our pilot training and never talk to the FAA once.
Yep.
I don't have to do a check ride with them. I never even have to interact with them. And we've always kind of like gone, geez, if I see a guy and he's going to ramp check me, this is horrible. And I think that's part of it is when you just don't know, you don't necessarily understand the roles and responsibilities, and some of those things come into play. And through this UAS component, we're in a very different standpoint with the FAA. Quite honestly, they can come across that way because we have like some very defined rules. When we're flying a manned airplane, I'm supposed to do my weight and balance every single time that I go fly. Literally the regs tell me that. So if somebody calls me out on it, it's on me. I just don't want somebody to call me out if I forgot to do it or something along those lines.
Uh-huh.
When it comes to UAS, part of the test site's mission has been helping the FAA through some of the regulatory process, providing them data so that, again, I go back to 107 did not exist when the test sites were stood up. Section 333 is, interesting. If anyone was part of it, you used to get a nationwide approval to fly. Some of those safety cases, they good chance that they learned a lot of lessons out of the test site. Example, before any of that happened, I had an entire approval to fly over the state of North Dakota from the surface to 1,200 feet before there was any of those types of things. That was a huge lift at the time for the FAA.
Yeah.
Lessons learned, safety cases, take that and you can expand it out. So we've been working with the regulator hand in hand in order to solve a lot of these problems. And it's not like, they're not just FAA, it's individuals. These are relationships. It's not, it's not FAA, it's Jay, it's Martha, it's real people who are doing these types of operations with us. And that collaboration is, we're both, they have their role, I have my role. I'm gonna push them, they're gonna push back. We got it, but we already know that going into everything. But we do have a common goal of this integration and trying to help out as many people as possible. So we're fortunate to be, I'll say, in the inner circle. There's no doubt about it that I probably, as a test site and part of Beyond and Integration Pilot Program, I have some of these relationships that in access to people that are really maybe not as accessible to everybody else. Yep. I get it. But what my role then is to, how do I push that information out? How do I make it beneficial for, I have no reason to keep that as close hold information, as much as I can be doing to help industry, and evangelize on behalf of the FAA. I think there's a lot of value in that.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a great relationship. And it's, I always hear people saying the FAA, it's this entity. But at the end of the day, everybody I've talked to at the FAA, with the very few exceptions, is pro-drone, wants to see this industry go and be safe. And that's, I think, sometimes what people forget when they criticize all the regulation that comes through is, there's an entity, which is the FAA, and then there's the people that actually make this happen. And that's two completely different mindsets and two completely different things. So I'm glad you mentioned all of this. Going forward, what's your next big challenge in implementing all of this?
So it's one thing to get it implemented, and then another thing to get it all approved. That's going to be one of the challenges that are going to come in. And we've actually had some great successes on approvals for flying beyond visual line of sight, and we've gotten approvals to do this. I've got routine operations that are happening with large UAS flying at higher altitudes without chase airplanes. That's a really big deal at this stage of the game. To me, actually, the big challenge on everything that we're trying to do is that repeatable side of things and scalable side. We've started to see, I think I can get some of these things done one time. Can I get it done twice? Can I get it done 3 times? Great example, one of what I'll say, our contribution out of the Integration Pilot Program is, one of the big challenges that you mentioned earlier was operations over people. How do we do that? That was one of the taskings that we did, as part of the IPP is, how do we make this accessible to more people? Having parachutes as a mitigation on a drone. We actually got one of the very first approvals ever to use a parachute as the mitigation. And it was for a very short window. Like, literally, we got the approval for like a long weekend. Okay, because that was like the exposure that the FAA wanted. And we had another use case that came out, a couple of months later, and they gave it to us for, it was like a couple of weeks to like a month. And because we're learning as we go, we're learning some of these different strategies. Now we've supported, some of the third-party validation testing on parachutes. We've almost gotten that to where, there's like 100 approvals out there for people who want to use a parachute.
Yep.
There's traceability that didn't happen overnight. There was a process, and I can be happy on that. I think we made a contribution to that, and that's now a repeatable process. That is something that more than one person can do. That very first approval, that was very individualized. There's a success with that of just getting that part done, but the real success is when there's 100 of them or 1,000 of them. So that to me is going to be the big deal, is when I get, the first one's going to be a big deal, but every subsequent, beyond visual line of sight approval, on Vantis is going to be, that's going to be the big deal.
Do you know of anybody else in the country that's working on something similar to you guys?
Yeah, I think that we see, various stages that are going into this. New York has been doing some work. They have they're kind of dubbing it as their 50-mile corridor. It's similar. It's not the same. There's a couple of different components. I think there's work being done. There's kind of corridor-ish type activity happening in Ohio. That's on. I'll actually drill into some of the specifics with some of the technology. Of course, like what you mentioned earlier, North Carolina has been doing a lot of great work with on some of the package delivery side and getting that up and going. So I think that really everyone's contributing to it, and again, kind of getting those firsts, and it's how do I take, I love what North Carolina is doing, and quite honestly, I don't look at it as a competition. I'd love to. It's a service that's being provided in their state. I would love for that service to be provided in our state or your state. That's really what the goal of all of this is. It's got to start somewhere. Someone's got to prove it out. But how do we get a service now being provided in multiple locations?
Yep. No, I love it. I love what you guys are doing. This is awesome. Are you guys hiring? I'm sure our listeners may be asking, what's the qualification?
Go to, so it's Northern Plains UAS test site, npuasts.com. I think it's like in our about, go down to careers. I've got a job posting that's out there right now. We're looking for an assistant chief pilot on the pilot side of things. So yes, and then continue to look back. We're this entire thing is growing. The organization is growing. Our partners are growing. That's another component of it as well. Even in our community, there's job postings that are out there in the UAS space. So the short answer is, if it's not with me, there's people around me that are hiring. Okay. And
yep. If you guys are listening, and then if you're interested, and to me, this is being a pioneer in a new side of aviation. The people that pioneered 100 years ago when they were starting to do flights, that's kind of where you guys are right now. I love it. I think this is super interesting. Well, Nick, I think this is all the questions I have. I really, really appreciate your time. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions on this. I'm going to post this on Monday. But anything else you want to add for anyone?
No, I think, at the end of the day, if there's a takeaway out of this, from the test site program, from what we're doing, we're a resource, and I want to, if there's a question, if there's something that, that we can help out with, or, something along those lines, again, more than happy to support that. That's why we were selected. It was to help out industry, to move industry along. And, any way that we can continue to support everybody who wants to be involved with this, arms wide open.
Well, I'm excited. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about this project in the future, and I'll definitely be talking about it. We do a Friday news update every Friday morning that we post, and I talk about what's happening in the world of UAS. So I'll be excited to talk about you guys. And Nick, thanks a lot for your time, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Greg.
All right, thank you.